This brief tutorial is to demonstrate a method for creating your chessboard that is composed of two elements, the frame and the playing field. So I want to demonstrate a method for creating those two elements and applying the textures in the correct manner. So we'll start by creating our board, which is just going to be a cube that has been resized down to an appropriate thickness. Make it editable. Select the top polygon, and we're going to inner extrude this in order to create our frames and playing field. So tap I on the keyboard, inner extrude, and inner extrude it as far as you want your frames to be. Then inner extrude it one more time, a short distance. This is to create a gap between the playing field and the frames, and drop your tool. Next, select that gap, UL, polygon mode. Select that gap. Activate your move tool, and with control drag, inset it a ways, doesn't have to be very far, but just to create a gap there, a visible gap. And there your board is. So now you've got your wooden frames and your playing field. So now we must bevel our edges, so UL in edge mode, select the outside edge of the frame, and hold down Shift and select the inside edge and the bottom edge. Then activate Live Select and simply Shift select the corners so they can all be beveled the same amount. Now we're not going to select the edges of the playing field here because we will apply a different bevel to those, a smaller one. Okay, so now bevel a little bit, add maybe 2 to 3 subdivisions. Look at it with our interactive render to see how that looks, and that looks good. Now select the edge of the playing field and bevel that with a smaller bevel. Interactive render to see what that looks like. Increase our resolution, and that's looking good as well. Alright, so now we must apply our materials. Now obviously you're going to have two different types of materials. You're going to have a wooden material for the frame, and you're going to have a checkerboard material for the playing field. But to begin with, just to simplify things, I'm going to create one material and apply it to the entire board. So make a material that I'm going to name wood, and just drag it on the whole board. Right, so it's applied everywhere. Now I want a wood material to this, and I want it to be ultimately cubic mapping, but I'm going to leave it for right now. I'm going to leave the projection at Uvw mapping in order to demonstrate to you an issue that you may run into. Now you can find lots of different examples of bitmapped, tileable wood textures on the internet. But I'm just going to use our content browser for this example. So I'm going to double click to get to my color properties. Activate color, of course, and texture. Have the texture slot here available. Then go to content browser. Go to materials. Under presets, go to materials, double click on that. Scroll down, double click on wood, and click on text, which is short for texture. Alright, so when your browser comes up, your browser may be more like this. So this slider down here controls the size of your thumbnails. So I like to see them fairly large, and you can scroll through and find a texture that you want, a material that you want. Of course, some of it is intended for flooring, or planks, and that's not going to work. So the browser does contain a few just flat wood textures, and so I'm going to use this ash color because I like the color of it, but also because it has a nice bump map associated with it. So I'm going to simply left mouse, click and drag that onto my texture slot, and you'll see the cursor will turn to a little hand, and just drop it when it does so. So now the texture has been applied to the entire board. Now we don't want it on the entire board, we want a different material on this playing field, but we'll deal with that in just a moment. So while we're still here, let's go and go to Basic, activate Bump, make sure that the Bump texture slot is available. Return to your content browser and drag that on into that slot, into the bump slot. There you go. So now the bump has been applied to the texture and synced to it. Okay. So if you orbit around here a little bit, you can kind of see the deformation, the tactile nature of the bump on the surface. You want to do an interactive render and put a light in here so you can kind of see the way the light reacts to the bump map. Of course, when you're orbiting, you can see the bump map more clearly because it's a simplified version of it. When you stop the orbiting, then it gets all smoothed out here, and if you want, of course, to see it more clearly, you can just go to the bump, increase the strength to something exaggerated like that, and you can see the grain, right, on it. Now, of course, your grain, you don't want to be that exaggerated. Naturally, don't want little children getting splinters from playing chess or checkers on that board, so put that back down to something reasonable here, 20, maybe 30%, so that there's some evidence of the grain, because that's the whole point, is to generate a sense of a tactile surface here. I'm going to make a fill light as well and pull it over here so I can see the detail on both sides of the board here in order to illustrate something for you. Alright, so as we move in close here, you can see that we've got a texture here applied to the board to make it look like it's got some grain, and that grain has a certain scale. And I've talked to you a good deal about maintaining proper scale of things in your models, and so here's a scale that can be changed if you want to, but this probably looks pretty good just the way that it is in terms of the scale of the board. But as you look at the scale of the texture here, then orbit around and look at it on the side, you can see that it's compressed here. It doesn't look correct. All right, certainly not the same scale as this up here. Now the cause of that is the Uvw mapping. So if we go back to our material here, change projection from Uvw mapping to cubic, you can see that now the texture is properly applied. All right? And that's the first thing that you need to be aware of or concerned with, is making sure that you have the proper mapping on your board. Now the next thing that you need to be concerned with, and I find students ignoring this all the time, even though I warn them about it over and over, that is that a piece of wood like the frame is made up here, the grain runs along the length of the wood, okay? Along the length, not across it at 90 degrees like this. Now, no carpenter would make a frame where the grain cut across the length of the wood because it makes it break too easy when the wood is cut in that manner. So you need to make sure that when you're applying something with grain, like a wood grain, to your meshes, make sure that the grain is running the correct direction. Just a part of being aware of the world around you and trying to imitate the world in your models. So we've got to change the direction of that grain right there. And the question would be, of course, well, okay, so you say that, now how to do it? Well, one thing that you could do is to activate your texture mode. And there's our wireframe representation of the cubic mapping solution. Activate rotate and rotate it, right? Because you can manipulate your texture that way. So rotate it. So we rotate it 90 degrees, and now we got the texture running the right direction here, but it's going the wrong direction there. So that's not going to work, right? So what we need to do is have two different textures. One in which the grain runs along the length of the wood here and the length of the wood here. That requires two different materials of the same texture. So let's make another material. We're going to use the same material because we want it to be the same. We just want the grain running a different direction. So hold down Control and drag to create a new material. And I'm just going to name it Rotated Wood. And I'll just leave this one Wood. So now what we need to do is apply this new rotated wood to the frame where the texture is running the wrong direction. Now in order to do that, activate your polygon mode. You need to select the polygons where the wood grain is running the incorrect direction. Now scroll in close because you beveled this, so you've got more than just this top polygon associated with that top surface. So select all those. Okay, then hold your shift down and orbit around and select the other side as well. I'm going to turn off the lights here so we can see it more clearly. Okay, so we're going to select those as well, so we have all of the polygons selected that are associated with that new grain direction. We're going to take our rotated material and apply it. Don't just drag it onto it, but apply it. Now we have a selection tag associated with that material tag, which is related to these pieces of mesh, to those polygons. But notice that they're still going the same direction because we need to rotate it. Okay, so go to your texture tag, click once on it to get to your projection because you have to reassign the projection because it's back to Uvw Mapping now. Open that up. Don't make it cubic. That won't work. Go to flat. All right, so make it flat. Now activate your texture mode. And you can see here how the texture is being projected as usual along the blue axis. So activate your rotate tool, begin the rotation movement, and then hold down shift to lock it to 5-degree increments so you can get to 90 easily. There you go. Now it's laid down flat in the proper projection. Now we need to rotate it, so grab the blue band, begin the rotation, hold down shift, 5-degree increments until it reaches 90. Drop that, return to the model mode, and now you've got your texture properly oriented. I can't tell you how many times I see students creating something made of wood in which they're not paying any attention to the way that the grain runs on that wood. Since we're trying to imitate the real world, you need to look at the real world around you and see how things like wood works, right? And then make sure that it works that way in your models. Okay, so now we have the grain running the proper direction along the different arms. All right? But of course, now we've got the wood on our playing field, which we don't want, obviously. Okay, so we do our interactive render here. It's looking pretty good so far, but we need a checkerboard pattern here. Okay, so we need a new material for that, of course. So make a new material, name it checker or whatever. Select that polygon, activate the cube, select that polygon. Okay, so because we want the checkerboard pattern only on that surface. right-click on the material and say Apply. Alright, so now that material is applied only to that polygon. You can see here in your Object Manager the tagline, our selection tag associated with that material. Now, we'll just leave this at UV mapping just so you can see what happens when we apply the material with this default projection. So double-click on your material, get to your Color tab, click on Texture menu, open that up, go to Surfaces, and from that big long menu, select Checkerboard. Okay, so now we have a checkerboard pattern applied to our playing field. Of course, the checkers are too small, and there are too many of them. So let's go back to our projection panel, Uvw Mapping, and of course we can change the tiling here to give it a size that we want. Okay, but sometimes that's a little bit hard to try to figure that out or get it just right without a lot of fussing. So I think it's just easier to use the texture mode. But in order to do that, we have to make this flat. So change from Uvw Mapping to flat. Of course, you can see it's going the wrong direction, stretched across the playing field. So activate your texture mode, and there's our projection widget. You can see it's projecting along the Z-axis. So activate your rotate. Begin the rotation, hold down Shift. Move it to 90 degrees. Okay, so now we've got it laying flat, but of course there are too many of them, so activate your Scale tool, T, and drag out here in an empty space for universal scaling, and just scale it up until you've got 8 checkers on a side. It should be right there. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. No, 10 checkers. Well, that's too many. Okay, so 8 checkers. I think that's 8 there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so there's our proper number of checkers. Go back to our model mode, and there's our checkerboard. Now, in another video, I demonstrate to you how to apply different materials to the same mesh. So in that video, which you need to now go watch and apply the principles therein in order to get dark and light checks, but made of different kinds of wood. And so after having created your checkerboard, you're now ready to create the playing field with the dark and light woods. So good luck with that.